Today on CoPro, we've got my old friend Brad Stewart. He grew up a skate grom in Flagstaff and ended up on the board of global brands that we all know. Between Bonfire, Solomon, and his brand Caravan Outpost, his story is really about ethics, instinct, and knowing when to walk away from a deal. We get into the MTV days, Tom, Sims, and Jake Burton feuding, and how he snuck snowboarding into the Olympics in 1998. He does go into how modern brands end up on platforms at holding companies and quietly life is just sucked out of them. Brad breaks down why the best ideas always are on the margins and always end up in the mainstream. This is the CoPro podcast, where we unpack how brands get built, run, and sometimes get wrecked. We talk about collaboration, we talk with athletes, we talk with creatives, brand leaders. Brad Stewart, welcome back to Portland, Oregon, and Nemo Design.
1, 2, 3, 4.
He's no one, she's no one, we're no one at Nemo.
So you come to Portland every Christmas?
Yeah, we do. I have kind of two chapters in life, and so two of my older children live here, and then Sean, my wife, Sean's family lives here, and it's kind of funny. I was talking to our youngest daughter. Sean and I have a 14, soon to be 15-year-old daughter, and I was explaining to her, there's kind of three chapters shaping up. There's my first 25 years of living, northern Arizona, driven. My childhood is basically 100% driven by punk rock and skateboarding. Snowboarding, comes along when I'm 14, which is in the kind of mid to late 70s. And I said, there's kind of that first 25 years, and I lived between California and Arizona. And then I did 25 years that I call my wet years, which was 25 years in Portland, Salem. And then hit 50 years old, moved back to California, and I said to her, your mom and I are 15 years deep in the next, what could be the next years, 25. Yeah. And so in another 10 or so years here, we'll have done kind of three different chapters. I said that may be what life is shaping up to be. And this was part of that, where you're going to go to college conversation, because really we're picking your college, and then also maybe the next chapter of
where we live
and what we do.
It's interesting. Yeah. But you brought up Arizona too, which is this crazy place to start.
Yeah. And
I'm picturing, Flagstaff, Arizona and snowboarding just don't go hand in hand. And you're 14 years old. And I've heard stories of Jake Burton calling you from on the road, and then why snowboarding? Seems like such a futile thing to be doing in Arizona. And then Flagstaff at that.
So many good things to say about Flagstaff, actually. So many good things to say about it. But, I kind of always saw my childhood in Arizona pretty simply. I was a kid who was an outsider in an outside sport, which was called skateboarding. wasn't cool. Football was cool. Baseball was cool. Basketball was cool. Skateboarding was sort of, why haven't you put that toy away? Was a regular question. Everybody skateboards. So at around 10 or 11 or 12 years old, go put that in the corner with your Frisbee and your hula hoop, and things will be good. Well, actually, I'm going to keep skating. I'm going to keep skateboarding. And so, the big challenge I faced in Flagstaff, we lived at around 7,000 feet. I had skied a little bit as a kid, but I didn't really come from the kind of family that frankly had the wherewithal financially to put me and my four brothers on the snow. We were big motocross family. My mom wrote for a motorcycle magazine. And in particular, the brother next to me up, my brother Randy, was an incredible motorcycle racer. And so we lived fast, skateboarding, motorcycles, and all that kind of stuff. But it snowed in Flagstaff, and I kind of thought, well, man, when the winter comes, I don't really have a whole lot to do. I don't play those traditional sports at the level that I'm going to, be any good. And so We lived at a house that had a really steep driveway. Let's stand on the sled. Let's take our trucks off. You know, if you made the skateboard just a little bit longer and a little bit slicker, you could go down the driveway quicker. That's kind of fun. It'd be actually cooler if we had a jump in the middle.
Ooh,
You know, because we're watching,
Bones
you know,
Brigade.
the beginning of the launch ramp to flat in skateboarding. That could be cool. Let's try that. You know, and to me, it just was a natural evolution. And then, yeah, when I was around 14, 15 years old, I had seen a little piece from a guy, Jake Carpenter, a little photo somewhere. I tracked him down, and he said, well, I'm going to be starting a company making these things. And I'm going to use my middle name, which is Burton. Me and my girlfriend are traveling, now wife Donna. We're going to be traveling, and you know, maybe I could come through your town in Arizona and we could hang out, because it sounds like you're building some stuff, and we could talk a little bit about that. And I think I've told the story before, but you know, I kind of explained to him, I'm a kid. I'm like 14, 15 years old, and I think if somebody from Vermont shows up on my doorstep in Arizona, my parents are going to freak out. But you should come, you know. And I had a relationship. I'd known Tom Sims because at times various skateboard companies had given me free equipment to skateboard on, and you know, we weren't quite, you know, skate parks were happening, but we didn't have that in Flagstaff because we had too much snow, you know. But I'd been to a couple of skate parks, and you know, there was a skate scene emerging. You had Sidewalk Surfer in Scottsdale, which was kind of later where people like Kevin Staub and guys like that came out of, you know. And so there was kind of an emerging scene, and we were just kind of sliding around with our skateboards on the wood, and then it very quickly, or on the snow, sorry, and it very quickly evolved to like, hang on a minute, there's something here. And I do think I can remember it vividly, even today, you know, many decades later. The first time I slid down, I thought, this is super fun. There's something here. I've never seen this. I haven't seen any, you know, I can't go Google or jump on TikTok or, you know,
Wasn't invented.
to see somebody doing anything, you know. And I think like the age of innocence was, but one of the best ways I think I can speak to it is, for some reason we thought it would be really cool to build a large frog out of snow. Like, instead of an igloo, let's build a frog.
All right.
And then let's try to jump the frog on these things that we're sliding down on. And we just thought that'd be like, that's so punk. You know, and my buddy John Jensen, you know, he could actually jump the frog, you know. And it was like, that's insane, dude. You jumped the frog, you know. And so that's kind of how innocent, you know, we were. And that was, you know, where we came from.
But he also hit on something too, is like things comes up as groups. You know, we see this pattern often through our industry, for sure. And there's a picture I found too, is like, remember this one? Brian Harper.
Yeah.
Again,
Yeah.
Flagstaff legend. And then Jensen came out of there. Billy Miller came out of there. And it's like there's a whole crew of like snowboarders that early on came out of Flagstaff, and that DNA in the water. What's going on with Flagstaff that all these, you know, if you look at the X Games today and you see a ramp, 9 times out of 10, Brian Harper's company built that ramp.
Oh, yeah.
So he's no slouch. Like, he's got his place in
he's
our
the best
history.
ramp builder in the world.
No doubt. And then he was a good snowboarder too. And again, who won that race that day? I want to know.
Well, here's the thing. I'm pretty sure I beat him.
I'm going to call him.
Yeah, you can call him, but I'm pretty sure, you know, because Brian and I race like that a lot. So I'm pretty sure I beat him. And then I'll immediately state the best snowboarder to ever come out of Arizona in that era is Brian. And he was many times better than I was. And he was a great skater, and he had style that was way beyond where our heads were at.
Yeah.
You know, and so you got Brian and Billy Miller. They were kind of the two kids that showed up on my door at the skate shop I worked at, you know, where they knew we were snowboarding and skateboarding and everything. And Brian in particular was a really good skateboarder, but a bunch of other guys in town there that had, you know, really good ramps. John Jensen and I were of the generation, we were like the no flat bottom guys. You know, we had the pure half pipe. We were coming out of like, what's your dream? Well, our dream is we want to go to the desert in Arizona and skate the water project pipes.
Oh, yeah.
Where we're seeing Tony Alva and Dwayne Peters and guys like that. And so even in that 3 or 4 year gap, you got guys like Brian,
Right.
who were like, well, you guys have kind of got it, but first of all, you need a little flat in your ramp because you guys are going to crack your heads when you're coming off of your hand plants and immediately landing on the other side of the ramp. But you got to think about this a little bit differently, and then, like you say, you know, Brian went on to become, in my view, Olympics, X Games, wherever you go, and there is an excellent ramp. Brian Harper is behind it today, which to me is just so awesome. And same thing with Billy. I think Billy wrote in his role at Transworld. I think he wrote some of the more seminal pieces about snowboarding, you know. And so I always ultimately felt like, you know, your legacy isn't really about what you did necessarily. It's about helping people get into a position so that you collectively create one of those hot spots, you know. And I always kind of felt like, man, there's the MBHC, the Mount Baker hardcore guys. They're kind of happening. I had gone to Lake Tahoe. Bob Klein was kind enough to let me sleep on his floor and said to me, hey, you know, there's a couple of dudes, Alan Armbrister, Terry Kidwell, down at the Tahoe City trash dump.
Right.
We've built something that's kind of like a pipe. You know, if you want to come and dig, you're welcome to ride it, you know. And so that was a pocket. There's a kid who lives in a trailer park called Sean Palmer down the road who's pretty rad and kind of pushing Terry's buttons a little bit because he's 7-8 years younger and pretty sick. You know, so you had these pockets, and I always felt like Flagstaff never really quite got its due because we had that whole other season that was just kind of pure skateboarding, you know. So we all kind of went our own ways and then reassembled, you know, for winter in a way. And but yeah, it was definitely a pocket and one of the first. ISM, Tom Shea with International Snowboard Magazine, ISM did a story on us very early in snowboarding. And I do think that was good. It kind of locked in, hey, here's 5 or 6 dudes, plus Carla Del Paz, you know, when you talk about female early history in snowboarding. Carla came straight out of what I think was a straight path to being an Olympic skier and dropped it all and started snowboarding. You know, yeah, I'm sorry, Carla. And, you know, we turned her onto that. And Carla, to me, was one of the early, most powerful women snowboarders. And, you know, unfortunately, injuries kind of sidetracked some of her progression. But, you know, there was a lot there.
Great scene. And, again, that's sort of the energy. And then we talked about, you know, there's plenty of tangents I want to take us on, too. Again, with, you know, we got Tom Sims, and then we've got Jake Burton. And they're just right there all of a sudden. The world was so small that you could have these conversations, and it's like people would engage. And so again, there's this trajectory now of like, I'm trying to make the math happen where you end up from Arizona and end up in California working for Vision. And so I was still checking it out, and I was curious if you had made it to that Vision Pro where the Chili Peppers played, and I think it was like 98 or something. Did you make it to that event? Or
the snowboard contest?
No, there was a skate contest. Yeah, like inside, and like Hassoy was riding, and Chris Miller and Tony Hawk, and I think even Gator might have been skating that thing. But it's like, and the Chili Peppers were playing with a, you know, Flea obviously, and they had a ton of energy. But I remember that video, and just being blown away at like, wow, that ramp's huge, and it just looks so fun. And then somewhere in there, you think you started just after that?
I don't know if I recall specifically being at the contest you were referring to, but Vision was a parade of the best bands of the 80s coming in and getting their free Vision streetwear shirt, you know, and getting all their gear. There was a lady there named Dana who ran promotions, and she was brilliant. She knew exactly, the artists to go to, until at one point Ricky Rocket came in from Poison, and I definitely remember all of us sitting there and thinking this could be the end of Vision, because Poison isn't punk in the way that we wanted. It's very different than Agent Orange.
Right.
Certainly the Chili Peppers at that time, that was more where our heads were at, not Poison.
But it's an interesting time too, is, you really look at Vision Streetwear at the time was setting a category onto itself as a brand.
Oh, yeah.
And again, Brad Dorfman is also probably another character. I'm sure there's some stories, and
Yeah.
for better for worse with Brad Dorfman, I always hear he was kind of the guy behind the scenes on that kind of stuff, and it blew up quick. Like, it literally must have been Ricky just kind of blew that shit up fast, because it seemed like it went bankrupt like not 2-3 years later.
Yeah,
And to
yeah.
watch something as big as what Vision Streetwear was, and how much trajectory it really had, and how, the numbers were there. It was a big brand. What do you think happened? Why did Vision fail?
Yeah, it's interesting. Vision was doing around 50 million, a touch under 50 million, in an industry that was probably an $80 million industry
Right.
in total, skateboarding at that time. And so again, the parallel is a little bit there to snowboarding. You had Richard Novak, and the Santa Cruz guys up north, and they had their little tribe and their little vibe and their look and feel, and Roscoff and Phelps and everything that was happening there, and you had that, and then you had kind of, for lack of a better word, the Orange County SoCal Vision guys. Paul Schmidt and a bunch of the guys had come in and been acquired by Vision, and so all the Schmidt Sticks crew, and those guys from the East Coast. And so, I think Vision was very successful in realizing if you get 10 skate companies together and you own the top 50 athletes, you can create a behemoth and really do a lot to promote skateboarding. There's a mix of kind of probably hubris, some ego, some poor management practice, a wide range of things that eventually brought it to its end. Also, difficult when your number one skater murders his girlfriend's friend.
You think that's a problem?
It caused a little difficulty.
A bit.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
I remember being in the office that day with
For those that don't know, it's Gator Rogowski. There's a whole biography.
yeah,
You
people
can watch
walking in the
show.
door and saying, "Hey, man, something crazy went down." And and I didn't have day-to-day interaction necessarily with every skater on the team, but we knew them, or I knew them, and Dana, whose office I worked in, Dana was ground zero for every athlete, and another Brad worked in there who was also ground zero, and so that also created a little moment in time that was pretty chaotic for Vision in a way. I think more than anything, what the great failure of Vision in my mind was, you had the most talented, creative people of the first generation of skateboarding, and I would even argue snowboarding. Mm-hmm. You had the first and most talented generation of those people, and you kind of blew it. And then you think, well, I always think a parallel to these businesses a little bit is the music business, and it's a little bit like, well, there was a moment in time where Sub Pop helped create this thing or corral this thing called grunge, and they created a revolution, and they had all the best bands and all the best people engaged in everything, and then it just kind of changed, and it wasn't that anymore. Because people move on.
Right.
And so that was a little bit of the story of Vision as well. People just, in a way, kind of moved on. Sims and Vision got in a lawsuit as well, which complicated a lot.
And it seemed like Rocco was kind of had his vision on what the next, evolution of snowboarding brands would be.
Rocco. Yeah, Rocco. You gotta love Rocco. And it's the universe correcting itself,
Yeah.
a little bit. Rocco realized, for all these people who've kind of corporatized skateboarding at Vision, or tried to make it a bigger thing in the way they've done it, there's always the other side. there's always the other angle you can take here, and he definitely went down that road.
Seems to have done all right. So now you're at Vision, and you've got the Sims brand is now being licensed, right, by Vision. And so you're working day to day with Tom. So again, this is the rival years. I mean, I remember going to Stratton and watching those two. It just felt like parents fighting. I mean, you see these two fighting literally in the cafeteria over who's setting the course and things like this. So it was like East versus West, Sims versus Burton. Obviously, if in this conversation it feels like a lot of tension, but it was probably the healthiest thing happening for snowboarding at that time. And here you are sitting with Tom Sims. And again, when I think back to on Tom's contributions, we definitely hear like, Jake comes out of Wall Street and has lots of money. You have Tom who kind of understands culture and style. And you wrote a really great piece when Tom passed. I don't want to jump ahead on any things, but just that Tom invented the snowboarder.
Yeah.
And some of the words and thoughts that you shared in that piece, and just we'll call it the brand deck that Tom had is like, never let Terry or Craig ride for anybody else. And there was like, always have style and make sure you always have a camera loaded with film when you go out. Like things that were part of the brand DNA of Sim snowboards at that time was so innocent and optimistic and even dated. I think one of them was like get on MTV, and here we sit today and MTV's done. But at that time it was so aspirational for your brand to want to be on MTV and be legitimized by being on, the big broadcast at that time. And you're building a brand literally from this guy's head. So
yeah, I have, I'll just kind of self-identify what I believe is my place in history in a weird way. That argument that you had, that you kind of detailed there, that kind of ongoing argument and acrimony and ultimately just competitiveness between Jake and Tom, somehow I found myself in the middle of that at a very young age. And I think the way that I found myself in the middle of it is Jake, Paul Alden, and myself, along with Tom Shea, Wiley Asher, a guy named Kevin Duncan, who's actually one of the better winemakers in the world. A guy named Jim Veltman, who had helped me at Vision a lot, very, very smart guy. We were kind of scrambling to organize snowboarding in a way and bring it to resorts, and actually Paul Alden on behalf of Burton did the heavy lifting there. He was kind of Jake's henchman in that regard. And so Jake and I had, I think, a lot of affection for each other. Number one, because I'd known him since I was 15.
Right.
And we had a certain trust with each other and everything. But I had kind of a unique position in that I was really the only person who could speak the non-Burton boarding language. I never saw snowboarding as Burton boarding. And so when people would talk about Burton boarding, I would say, well, hey, hang on a minute.
Hey.
You got some guys in Baker, you got some guys in Flagstaff, you got some guys at Trash Dump in Tahoe. This is a little bit different than that. Then on the other side, Tom had kind of known me as a child as well, Sims, and he had kind of taken me as a confidant of, could you sit in those meetings and represent our interest of what we want to do? And, Tom always had kind of interesting and wonderful advice of like, let's organize this thing. I'm all for getting on resorts and we need to organize and do some stuff, but let's be careful not to get too organized. Which is really just classic Tom Sims advice.
Yeah.
Let's get it organized, but hey, man, let's leave this thing a little bit messy. Because Tom really understood that part of skateboarding, and he kind of thrived. Ultimately, probably why he didn't succeed as radically as he should have in the business world is because he liked that gray area, that emerging zone of the sport. He liked it when skateboarding was kind of loose and free, and he wanted to keep snowboarding a little bit loose and free and not be too tied down. And that's why when people were like, hey, what are we going to do about Sean Palmer climbing on the roof in Vancouver or up at Whistler? Well,
yeah.
well, we're going to send Brad up there to talk to him, but actually, Brad's not going to tell Sean to get down. Sean and Brad are going to talk about, hey man, what's going on? You ready for tomorrow? Big competition tomorrow.
Yeah.
You look like you had a little bit to drink. It's about 1 a.m., 2 a.m. in the morning. How you feeling? You know, and that was kind of how we managed the team. And it's funny because ultimately it led into weird things like part of the reason we lost Craig Kelly was he was pleading for organization because Craig was a great guy in that regard. He was an educated person who had a deep interest in science and all these other things, and he was somebody who needed a certain structure. And at Sims, it was kind of like, well, we could have that structure, or we could just dig a pipe and ride like hell, you know. And you bring the music, and I'll bring the other stuff, and let's do it, you know. And yes, MTV. Tom and I talked a lot about the importance of getting it on MTV. Swatch and MTV had done the first Brecken World Championships.
So it's like 88?
Yeah,
Somewhere there.
something around
Yep.
that time, 88, 89. They had done that, but it was kind of really poor, and then in a way, kind of a poor representation of the sport.
Moguls? What?
Yeah, exactly. God love Andy Hetzel. And
Arizona's finest.
mogul champ and AZ guy.
Still
Yep.
is.
But my mission became very directly get snowboarding on MTV in the coolest way possible, and so I dove head first into MTV for about a 4-year, 5-year period, bringing it to the top 20 countdown, getting MTV Sports
Yep.
on board with snowboarding and a lot of
Cap
those
and the
things.
crew.
That was my
Yeah.
that was my thing, and I thought this is emerging. The video piece of it made a lot of sense to me as somebody
Yep.
who'd gone to film school. I thought this is a great way to consume music and sports. And, you know, Tom's rules truly were don't go anywhere without a camera. If Sean does something crazy, don't tell him not to do it. Shoot it.
Get the pick.
Get the
Yeah.
pick.
And Tom was a good shooter, too.
He was a great shooter.
Yeah,
All
that-
Nikon
that-
guy like you.
Yeah, yeah. That Wine Rock shot of Terry, I remember seeing that, just freaking out.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that was Tom's picture.
Yeah. Yeah. I give him a lot of credit because he didn't wait for somebody to tell you what snowboarding should look like.
Mm-hmm.
And he wasn't particularly interested in let's go find a bunch of ski shooters, teach them how to shoot snowboarding and get going. He was like, we're shooting this on our own. What's the snowboard picture look like? I don't know,
Yeah.
but I'm going to go shoot it. And one of his other really funny things was, you know, just always make sure the base is showing. It has to say Sims. You got to see my name in every picture. If you see part of it, that's not good. You have to see all of it. You know, which was kind of, you know, fun.
A little bit ego.
Yeah,
maybe.
fun. You know, kind of, all right.
All right,
Yeah,
we'll
we
go
could-
with it.
We could think about that, you know.
So now we got you at Vision. Sims is sort of starting as a brand. You've got access to Craig Kelly. He's on your team at this point. You've got Kidwell, who's now freestyle is blossoming. There's pictures that Bud Fawcett and crew had taken at Tahoe have started to permeate. Tom Shea has started ISM Snowboarding Magazine. You found your, I want to make a note too. Is like I always saw you as the outsider looking in as the peacemaker, like you were the adult in the room.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways, when I'd see these two egos, I didn't know it at the time, but the two egos go clash, and then Brad would kind of smooth the plates, and everybody could kind of keep going and having fun. But it was necessary at that time.
Yeah, I spent a ton of time going between Jake and Tom. And I had different relationships. I didn't work for Jake. So our conversations were kind of on his terms, you know. It was, hey, Brad, I need to talk to you about something. I mean, our earliest official clash in the business world was when I am sitting in my office at Sims in Vision. Phone rings from upstairs, Dorfman. Bad sign, usually when Dorfman is calling the snowboard guys.
Uh-oh.
Hey, Brad, can you come up here? Yeah, I'm like thinking, did I turn in my expense report? What haven't I done? I don't know anything about being a professional at all to work, We got a letter. Do you know who Bob Weber is?
Uh-oh.
Yeah, I remember Bob Weber. Yeah, he's one of Tom's buddies. Well, Bob Weber says he patented the snowboard.
That conversation.
Can I see that patent? Yeah, here it is, Brad. Take a look. Flip, 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 flip. I would know at that age, a valid or invalid patent. Looks like patent. Yeah, that's pretty. Yeah, okay. Well, he's buddies with Tom. What's the discussion? Well, here's the second piece, Brad. This is a letter from Jake Burton asking for a royalty on every single snowboard we've sold. Okay. What do you mean by that? Well, he's looking at, I can't remember, it's either $2 or $4 or $6 or, it was in the under $10 a board thing. And I remember everybody panicking, saying like, well, we've sold 12,000 snowboards over the last 5 years. That's a ton of money,
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, so let me get this straight. Jake Burton is saying we need to write him a check for, at that time, what would have been a bunch of money to our company, because he has bought the patent from Bob Weber. That's what you're telling me. Yeah.
Oh, no.
Brad, you have to call Jake.
Fixer.
Okay. Also, can you call Tom? Brad, can you call Tom? That's why, in a weird way, Vision was like this little island I worked on. It was like between Jake and Tom in a way. And so, okay, well, what am I calling Tom for? Ask Tom if Bob Weber really patented and invented the snowboard, because Tom has told us he invented many of these things.
Ah.
Okay, so here was my track. First call, Chuck Barfoot.
Okay.
Hey, Chuck, remember when you were working in Tom's wood shop and you guys had a little bit of scuffle about why you were making Barfoot boards on Sim's dime and why you thought Tom was taking advantage of you and, blah, 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 blah. Tell me about Bob Weber. Oh, yeah, great guy. Yeah, he did some stuff with us and worked in the skate shop and on and on. Okay. All right, I get a little bio on that. Then I call Tom. Hey, Tom, what's the situation with Bob Weber? Oh, great guy. He didn't patent the snowboard. Half that's so much of my work. We'll fight that thing to the end. Vision's got a giant checkbook. It's a big company. Move on to other stuff, Brad. Okay, well, just so you know, I'm getting a lot of pressure from upstairs to manage this thing. Get a hold of Jake. Hey, Jake, what's going on with this patent? Legal issue. Can't talk to you.
Oh, no.
Okay, somebody else I can talk to? Yeah, here's Paul.
Oh, no.
Alden.
And the lawyer.
Okay, hey, what's going on with this? Thankfully, some snowboard shops are like, hey, why don't we, produce some stickers? You can't patent fun.
Yeah.
Whatever other sayings there were at that time. Burton gets just enough pressure to say, okay, we're just going to drop it and pocket that to help the industry and help, we're going to do it for the better of the industry, because Bob Weber could come in and make some crazy claim and all of us would have to pay money. Meanwhile, Tom Sims is coming into Vision. Hey, I know you guys are fighting about this thing. I've got a snowboard I built in 1964. Ta-da. The wood shop when I was in high school. Anybody ever heard Tom talk about that board? No. Anybody ever seen that board? No. Should we call his sister? No. How about calling his dad? No. Tom, are you warranting that board was made by you in 1964 pre-patent? Yes, I am.
Damn.
Hovering question of, is this real? Is this something that was built last night or yesterday or today or
Right.
1964 and so on? And I just kind of came down to like, this is just part of the conflict. This is just part of the back and forth, and it's all going to go away because in the end, the kids own this sport. In the end, the kids are going to do what, like, they don't care. This is like inside baseball chatter, and I'm running back and forth up and down stairs, and Dorfman, call Jake and tell him this and this. Oh, yes sir. And and call Tom and tell Tom to prove that snowboard was made at that time. And we had a guy named Orland Oswald who worked for a Vision at that time, he came from the oil business in Texas, and he was like a real businessman, a real
Tycoon.
tycoon. Yeah. Very, very wealthy, very smart guy. And and he was always trying to organize and formalize and get things structured and so on. And he was like, this whole thing is just a mess. We should not even be in this sport. It's just a mess. You got Craig Kelly suing us. You got Tom has signed a contract with Craig Kelly at the bus stop in Albany on the days before the races. And then Paul Alden has mentioned to Craig Kelly that might not be the best way to solve a contract issue. And then Tom has said that Paul has tried to steal Craig Kelly. And then Craig Kelly is calling us saying he ordered a snowboard 4 weeks ago that he still does not have. And what's going on? Like, you guys are a train wreck, and we kind of were in a way because we were all young and trying to figure it out, and but thankfully at that time, I think I did have the presence of mind to realize a little bit of this is Steve Jobs and Bill Gates. Billy Miller and I have talked about this later. This is Steve Jobs and Bill Gates. And this is the early days of a business developing, and these guys have different ideas about the operating system.
Right.
and so we got to sit here in the middle. And, I was kind of helped and hindered by I was so young and so damn dumb that I didn't really realize jumping back and forth between these guys and mediating and wasn't really the way to do it. Mm-hmm. And then on the other hand, it was highly functional. Highly functional. At the time. And it was really fun. And I didn't realize I was in that spot until much later as an adult when people would talk about, well, you remember that meeting we had, where we were trying to create NASBA, the North American Snowboard Association, the first association for snowboarding ever. Mm-hmm. You remember when we had that meeting? Yeah, I was there. Oh, you were there? How old were you? 21, 22, something like that. Well, who else was there? A bunch of old guys, Tom and Jake and Chuck, I think, stopped in for a little while. A guy named Jamie Salter had stepped into the meeting a little bit because he was coming in from the sailboard windsurfing business.
Right.
And considering getting into snowboarding, and walking in and talking about how we were all thinking too small and would never make any money. And, of course, actually he turned out to be more right than all of us financially. And so, crazy period. Actually, even as I talk to you, I'm like, wow, what a
privilege.
Wild,
and then
wild ride.
I think it's important, again, with podcasts to be able to get this stuff down. Again, these two have passed.
Yeah. That
really did start these things, and it's sort of like we just don't want any of that stuff to kind of fade. And so these conversations kind of, I think, help keep it floating.
Snowboarding has a little bit of an issue that I think is very different from skateboarding, actually. And the issue in snowboarding is a guy like Terry Kidwell would be revered and known by every skateboarder. He would be a Tony Alva figure who would have had a 40 to 50 year association with Vans, for example.
Right.
Snowboarding doesn't work like that, and I don't know why. We don't connect to our history in the same way. When I introduced my daughter, I was at an event, ran into Christian Hosoi, introduced my daughter and said, this is, one of your dad's people from the era.
Right.
Christian, who I don't know super well, but know him well enough to, chat a bit. And he introduced himself to my daughter and everything. And my daughter, as we walked away, said, that person seemed very important to you, Dad.
Wow.
And I said, he is. And she said, why? And I said, well, he's kind of, the only comparison I can make, I guess, is for my era, he was kind of like the Michael Jordan of our sports, to which my daughter was like, who's Michael Jordan? You mean the shoe guy? 14, 13 years old. You mean the shoe guy, the Jordan shoes?
Yeah.
Scratch that. That person would have been bigger than every influencer you ever watch on any social channel ever. Right. And that would have been a person you tried to imitate. Snowboarding, I think Terry Kidwell could walk into one of the largest snowboard events in the world, stand on the side of the pipe, and nobody would know who he is.
Nope.
And that's kind of strange to me. And maybe that'll change over time and evolve a little bit. Were Craig around still, maybe that situation would be different. Craig has the unfortunate benevolence and reverence of many, many people in snowboarding, and they know him in history, because of because of his life story. Eric Blem, as you know,
Yeah.
wonderful research and wonderful book. And so, yeah, getting this down in snowboarding, I feel, is important. I'm afraid it's going to go away. A lot of the people I talk to about snowboard history, who are the experts in snowboard history, I do find myself thinking, well, you came along, you were there later in the 90s, late 80s,
Right.
90s, but there was this other chapter that, like you said, and you personally witnessed it, where you got Tom and Jake like yelling at each other at contest, like
Right.
well, crazy.
It's that game of telephone, and it just gets diluted as we remember it and tell the story differently and shorten something, miss something, and then it just doesn't have the same, legacy as it could have if it just, again, we captured it here. Hopefully it'll have some spot in history. Who knows
Yeah,
what it'll do.
yeah.
So we're now at Sims, and then we saw Vision.
At the time, I was also kind of bubbling on a little bit of a project. One time at Vision Streetwear, somebody had walked in my office and said, "Do you have a cool name?" I was really good at naming products, coming up with written words, and things. And you got any ideas to name for a skateboard wheel? Yeah. I think Bonfire is a really cool name. My friends and I used to burn all of our snowboards on the mountains at the end of every year in Flagstaff, and a lot of the native tribe guys would be cruising around and laughing at us. And what are you guys doing up there? And, we're just burning our boards. Next year they'll be a lot better. I probably burned some of the most valuable snowboarding history in my life. And so, but yeah, I like the name Bonfire. Yeah, it's cool. Oh, that sucks, man. We're not calling skateboard wheels Bonfire later. I wrote it down. I think I'll trademark that. I know enough to look through Bob Weber's patent. I understand the basics of intellectual property now that I've met with some attorneys. And so I'd kind of been bubbling on this idea for a company called Bonfire. And got a typewriter from my mom in the 8th grade, which was kind of a big deal to me because she was a writer and I wanted to be a writer. And so I'd typewritten the word Bonfire out. And this was before fonts and everything, on Macs were, readily available to everybody. And so then I left Morrow and I thought, I'm going to take all of this experience and do my own company and operate in the way that I believe a company should operate. And in the period of that time with Bonfire, developed Bonfire into the second largest snowboard apparel company in the world. And so I felt like I was, checking some pretty fun and pretty cool boxes. I'd also invested Chad, who was at Transworld at the time, had called me. Me and my friend Andy are going to start a watch company called Nixon. I'm
Chad
quitting my
Denena and
job.
Andy Latz.
Yeah, Chad Denena. Yeah, sorry, he's fading. And I just love Chad and Andy, and they're super smart guys. Do you need some money to start your watch company? Here's a few bucks. I got a little bit, not a ton, but I got a little bit, And so they'd gotten that going and delivered an incredible project. And so it was a really just dynamic and fun time. Everything worked actually, which was kind of incredible. When you think about how inexperienced we were.
So this is what, 1991-ish?
Yeah, this is in the early 90s. I had trademarked the word Bonfire very early, and then I kind of formally started the company in 89. And it was funny because when I left Sims, Tom said to me, hey, I know you have that Bonfire thing going on. What's your big idea? I said, well, my big idea is that snowboarding apparel should be like streetwear, because there's only a couple of other brands around. I'm seeing Quimbola Man and a couple of other things, and these are like big blocky variations of what North Face is doing, but I want streetwear. Well, why do you want streetwear? Because I'm sitting at Vision Streetwear watching cool stuff be made day after day after day after day after day, because at that time Vision was popping. And okay, so you think streetwear could be made into snowboard apparel? Yeah, it'd have to be waterproof, but it could have a street look. That's an interesting idea, Brad. I don't know if it's true or not. At that time, Tom was really into a brand called Jet Set, and so Sims,
Euro.
Sims, full Euro brand.
Yeah.
Sims had apparel at that time, but we were more or less, Tom and I would go to St. Moritz, walk into the Jet Set store. What do you like? Well, I like that, and that. take it over to Vision. Hey, Vision, can you give us something
Wait,
kind
is
of like
that one-piece green?
I
suit?
have a bunch of those. If you
Dude,
need
that
one,
thing is
I got a
hitty.
few.
I'm gonna put a picture of it
Yeah.
up here. Like, oh god,
I got a few.
orange.
Yeah, I have orange and the
you go.
green, and which we made them out of Vision Streetwear, like a surf trunk fabric that was
Random.
totally unusable for surf trunks and snowboard apparel. But so Tom had said, "Will you sign an option that I can buy Bonfire from you if you ever sell it?" Sure. Signed it. Love Tom. Many years later, when Solomon came to me to buy, the company, to
Those
buy
guys.
Bonfire from me and really, take it to the next level, literally at the 11th hour, I'm sitting in France negotiating with their attorney, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I signed a contract with Tom
No way.
like 6 years ago that gave him the right of first refusal. Everybody pins down for a minute. Whoa, I have to call Tom Sims. What do you mean you got to call Tom Sims? I have to call Tom Sims. Hey, Tom, remember that contract? Yeah. Hey, I hear you're selling the company to Solomon, maybe. Yeah. Remember I signed a right of first refusal? Yeah, kind of. Yeah. Oh, wait a minute. So, Brad, you're telling me I have a right of first refusal so that I could buy it instead of Solomon? Yes. The only caveat is you have to pay me more. What's their price? Gave him the price. Can't really do that right now. Can't really do that. Okay, could you just write me a letter formally passing on that? Somebody will write you something.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
And it was a crazy moment. Crazy moment.
Amazing.
And I had like $5 in the bank, a couple of kids, a Subaru that
Yep.
wouldn't pass DEQ.
Up on the hill.
I needed the money.
And this again, it's like where Bonfire starts is where my call to you was we were in Nebraska coming through, and what the deal was is you gave us $500 because my wife at the time was working the East Coast. We're turning screws at demos, and then we had our little silver van, and then, hey, you want to come work with Mickey Keller on the team?
Yeah.
And so, let's do that. Get out to, unlike being in California, living Syracuse, New York was not a problem.
Yeah.
Salem looks amazing. Let's go. And sight unseen.
Yeah.
Let's go. And
Yeah.
$500. I remember you had to put in your PIN number. Hey, Brad, we're checking in. We're almost there. He goes, well, I won't be there when you get here. So I was all excited to work with you, and it's kind of been that way. Our whole path is like it's kind of this hop thing. You actually get to work on a project, but kind of in parallel. And we got there and continued to work on the brand. Eventually, I was creative director of the brand. You had been long gone by that point, but again, I think I shot some Bonfire stuff, and again worked with the brand there too. But how funny those intersections go. Because again, we wouldn't all be here if that $500 hadn't come through. Because that was everything back then. That was like a big amount of money to get out here, and I never had enough money to get out.
Well, I always tried to build. What I had seen is like, okay, hang on a minute. I kind of have a little pathway here. I'm really the first person that I know in snowboarding who has gone from working in a shop where we sold like 3 snowboards a year, which was a banner year. Then I got on a team. Then I got on another team. So I've checked Sims and Burton boxes. Then I've gotten an education and got my college degree. And then I've come into the industry, which is brand new. And there is no one else here who started at the bottom. They're not there yet. And so I always kind of saw it as, well, my job is find team riders, help them create a good career in whatever way that ends up being defined kind of by them and by me making a few mistakes and knowing, a couple of ways of looking at things, and then hire them and try to bring them into a place where they can professionalize their expertise, because snowboarding is going to be really big. And a little bit in the background is a guy who I think, again, this is somebody who should absolutely be in every single snowboard museum anywhere in the world, David Injemi. Because David Injemi, who ran the SIA, David Injemi, we had done the craziest thing to get into the SIA. The SIA was the Ski Industries of America, Snow Sports Industries of America organization that governed winter sports business for skiing. They hated snowboarding. They didn't want us in there at all. Tom had gone to the show and done a little bit at one time, and there's a whole sidebar in history that Jake was there too, and did Tom see some stuff, and did they trade some ideas in some form, and maybe they did, maybe they didn't. Tom never talked to me about that in any way at all. But there was a time when we weren't allowed later to come into the show. Snowboards were prohibited from the show. It was the largest marketplace in the world for
Vegas, right? This
sports.
show. Yep.
Yeah, it would be the equivalent of somebody saying to you, you can't be on Amazon, your product's illegal. We were like in where cannabis was a few years ago, like, hey man, nobody's going to sell that anywhere. Tom and I figured out a wrinkle, which was, well, if a company owned a booth, there was nothing in the SIA charter that said you couldn't sublet or sublease that booth. So we found out that our factory at that time for boards we were making in Europe, which was Spalding, we found out that Spalding owned an SIA booth. And I drafted a contract to sublet the booth from
No
Spalding.
way.
Spalding said, we have this booth, but we're not going to use all of our space. I said, can I buy that space? I'll sublet it. Sure, yeah. No, nothing in SIA rules. Nobody's ever done anything like that. And so Tom and I, we'd figured out, okay, just to be cool, let's make every single board in the line black because we're sneaking into the show. We snuck into the show. We brought all the boards in we had a big rolling bin that we put a big black cloth over. We brought them in. We put up a big cloth in front of the booth so they couldn't see what was going on. Bang, show day. We popped the thing down, and there's Sim Snowboards right in the middle of the SIA show. David and Jimmy came to me and said, don't ever do this again. Don't ever do this again. Because if you'll just be patient, you guys will be a big part of this industry someday. You didn't do it the right way. Don't sneak in my show. But I'll actually work with you and teach you the ropes a little bit. Because this is such a ballsy, crazy move that I kind of like it. And all the while, growing up in Flagstaff, I'm thinking of people who were famous in our town, like the Durker brothers, who were the crazy ski patroller, river running guides on the canyon in the summer. He took that jump and did that, or, they were all telemark guys. You can't, pin down that. Well, man, I saw the Durker brothers at midnight pinning down that with, blindfolds on, wearing cowboy hats, smoking whatever. And so, to me, this was like, this is the spirit of these sports.
Yeah.
This is exactly what we should be doing. We should be stirring it up a little bit, Yeah, but Injemi was great, and Injemi turned out to be a really important guy in terms of educating both Sims and Burton. He did a lot with Burton. Injemi created the first ever snowboard committee with the SIA, which became the foundation for everything that Jake and another really important person, Dennis Jensen, and I worked on that. To where we eventually sued, the U.S. ski team that was a big part of how snowboarding arrived at the Olympics, and a big part of the negotiation with FIS and kind of teaching FIS at that time a different way of looking at the sport and how they could do it. So there was there was just a lot of, even as I recount these things to you, like, this is such a compressed period of time.
It's
and there was a lot, there was a lot happening. A lot.
Thanks for doing that.
Yeah.
We all appreciate the side effect, though. It's nobody remembers. The other thing you started doing, too, that I've always admired or just take note of is, again, surrounding yourself with smart people. You mentioned a little earlier, too, and just giving them the place. So even on Bonfire, you had David Benedict early on.
Yeah, great kid.
I mean, dude's just not talked about enough. But again, I always call him a Renaissance kind of guy. Great artisan, great athlete, inventing tricks, understood the medium, understood the engineering of boards. He used the full package deal. You don't really get riders like that come by every single day. So congrats. You lined up too again, bringing, then there's an acquisition at some point. You were early there, getting out of the bonfire opportunity, I think 95. And then moving from, Jason Ford and Solomon,
Yeah,
right? And
yeah.
so again, it's like, I remember you saying too, is like our goal is not to let the ski industry in, but it came in. It came in hard, right? And K2 obviously came in. And you weren't part of the Morrow acquisition. I got to see that mess, and then obviously Solomon and making a team that made sense. And so I think bringing that Jason in, and I think Blattner was in part of that program. I mean, that team was a good, solid team, and that was something that you brought to the table. And again, I have to see as your career too keeps growing. Now you're on, let's call it a board. You're starting to get to the C-suite. You're starting to, move up the ranks as far as like what the jobs are, and getting further up the ranks. And I always wonder, like, VP Global Digital Marketing for Solomon Arc'teryx, Wilson Atomic, under the Yammer brand.
Yeah.
What's that all about?
It's like any title in a big company. One of the things I always felt is, and I'd seen this a lot, working with people from the big sports brand. Bonfire for a long time belonged to Adidas.
Yep.
I'd worked in the Adidas system for a little while. Sitting at dinner with the president of Adidas Global, having these mind-blowing conversations, 30-something billion-dollar company, having people say, so, tell me about the Beastie Boys, what do you,
Cool.
why do the Beastie Boys wear our shoes, and thinking, why do people think I have these answers, and then giving an answer to, I didn't look dumb at the dinner table. But, what I had tried to do eventually at Amer, I had become, and I've always been fascinated with just the future of sports. Snowboarding just kind of taught me always look ahead. Punk rock had actually always taught me look ahead. I was always, as a kid, trying to find new bands before everybody else, and this is before the internet, so you had to like learn who's coming out of England, and oh, what's that band called, the Smiths, and who's the guy, Morrissey, and he's the singer, okay, and what's he, oh yeah, Johnny Marr, and okay, and that's Manchester. Where's Manchester? Got to look it up on a map, and you got, oh, okay, so this is like Pittsburgh in America, and these are like, okay, got it. You had to put all these things together that you don't have to do today.
Yeah, it's so easy.
And so, but I'd always been very interested in kind of the future of things. So eventually, I came to Amer, and I said, Amer Sports, who owned Solomon at that time, still does today. I came to them and said, I think I should be looking 10 years ahead, and I have some ideas about, how our company could develop another billion-dollar business in 10 years based on what's happening with this sense of quantified self and everything. And one of my sayings in the company was, in all the traditional sports, there's a field, there's measurements, and then there's teams. And in all of these sports, you don't have those fields and measurements and all these quantified things that you have.
No.
But you actually have a team that's, I would argue, as connected as any professional sports team. You have people who play together in nature in a way that's very team-oriented, and I'd seen that with, when you bring David Benedict and Jason Ford together, two guys who couldn't have grown up in a more different way, and they love each other, and they ride together, and they play together as a team, air quotes around that. And so they said, well, what do you want to be called? Go for it. We'll give you a budget. You've done a good job in snowboarding. You seem a little bit bored at work sometimes. And, what do you want to be called? I said, well, I think it's kind of VP of Global Digital, because I need to work globally. And I was working globally, basically from day one at Solomon, working on a worldwide basis. And I'd always traveled quite a lot to everywhere in the world that I could. So I think it should be, VP of Global Digital, and then each of the brands have their own global digital people as well. And so sometimes I would come in and have a lot to do with helping those brands, and then at other times those brands would do their own thing and work and operate in their own way. Arc'teryx was always a funny one, because I'd gotten a lot of pressure from Solomon saying, we want Bonfire to be bigger, second largest snowboard apparel brand in the world, but not big enough for Solomon. You need to be sitting around 100, 150 million. And I made a side comment of, well, I think there's only one brand that would get to that size pretty quickly, and it's called Arc'teryx. And I think Arc'teryx is really doing something unique. It's not a snowboard brand, it's in the larger outdoor world. But if you guys quickly want to get a company and make it very, very big for all people in the outdoors, Arc'teryx is the only brand I see doing that. I kind of know the guy, Jeremy, who's there a little bit. And then, boom, they buy Arc'teryx, and it explodes, and today continues to explode. And Jean-Luc in particular, played a pretty he's the guy that kind of pulled the trigger on that. And so it was a lot of interesting thinking about what the future of Amer could be and how to get bigger. And then you had the Wilson Sporting Goods guys who were very traditional, very different sports mind, and so on. And that was also a lot of learning. So I enjoyed being at that level.
So what's the real job there? Again, there's a fiefdom between, everybody and then this board, and then there always seems to be a disconnect between people with the money and the checkbook not really knowing what the trend's going to be because they're just not living it. There's a generational gap, and it's so critical for brands to, like we see with this story earlier on Vision, not realizing that the trend was going to end and something new was going to begin. They didn't have, we'll call it the foresight or the, innovation teams to kind of think about what's it going to be in the future. And so how is it at a company that size, and it seems like Amer's doing a pretty good job of the brands that they have. They always seem to, and again, when I hear like, oh, we need to be bigger, it seems like that's all the guys in the C-suite do is like, make more, go faster, more. And then at some point it just explodes, and you watch these brands just crumble to nothing, where you have a sustainable brand like, again, they built the world around Patagonia, and it's like they kind of grown and been themselves and not really had to, keep up with like some guy in the C-suite saying, I want more money, go make it happen.
Yeah, this is just so prescient. I literally, as I was driving here, was speaking with my attorney, who is also my friend, Sabrina Menskis. Sabrina said, one of the bigger questions we face as society, we were talking about AI and a bunch of other stuff, is when do people say, this is enough, I've made enough money, I'm okay, I don't need more, how much is too much, And that was always a question for me at Amer, and how we were operating, what we were doing, and just working in the right spirit. Here's what I believe actually is happening. I'm just going to throw a big hairy philosophy out, and maybe in 2 or 3 years people will say, wow, that was, Brad nailed it, or they're going to say, that guy, what a dummy. But VF, Amer, and many other companies over the last 15 years have focused on developing platforms for the business. And the reason they focus on that is it's a combination of packaged goods people and private equity groups coming in and saying, let us professionalize this for you. You guys are kind of a little too authentic. Let us professionalize this for you. Here's the way to do it. You build a platform. Platform has one legal department, one finance department, one marketing department, and they service many, many, many brands. And then there's some consumer-facing stuff that we'll let you do on your own, which is your brand. That's how you do it, guys. You pioneers of the sport, can you step aside for a minute? We got some people who used to work at Target or Procter & Gamble or wherever.
Google.
So that chapter happened and it kind of worked, and VF is probably the best example of it working. You could add Caring and a couple of other, the larger groups in Penfield. That worked. They built the platform. Great. Let's put North Face on the platform. Let's put Vans on the platform. Let's put a couple of other things on the platform. That's the way to go. And at Amer, we were looking at it and thinking, well, the way you get from 3 billion to 10 billion is you got to imitate the platform that VF has built. So let's bring in some packaged good guys, so on and so on. Let's keep a couple of guys like Brad around who can be authentic, but their measure of success is a little different. My measure of success is if Jason Ford calls me and says, I booked a helicopter in Alaska, I want to go snowboarding, I can say yes. And in spite of being absolutely terrified following Jason Ford down a run at the bookends in Alaska, I can do it. The packaged goods people can't do that. And you know, that to me was always a measure of pride. Jake, I think, was wired very much the same way. Tom, for sure. But so they created these platforms, and then what started happening is these platforms began kind of eating each other in some form. So Vans would be very successful, and the North Face might have a tricky year. And the platform would say, well, the North Face needs some of Vans' money. And Vans would say things like, well, hang on a minute. We need that money to keep the chain going. We have to keep growing and promoting. There are new customers, new people, new ways of communicating. Yeah, but North Face needs that money. You know, and I don't know if this is factually what happened, but I've definitely seen this where the platform begins to eat itself. That's where Amer was when I left. And to me, part of the reason I left is eventually they pulled me on the platform. We want you to take what you have experienced and you know, and we want you to talk to Arc'teryx. We want you to talk to Wilson. We want you to talk to Salomon. We want you to talk to these other brands about what your experience has been and help us steer this platform looking far into the future. Can you be part of that group? Yeah, I can do that. But eventually I came down to just people want to belong to these brands. They have a certain affinity to these brands, and you can't just put them on this platform when all of the technology, I mean, you know this as an expert and a leader in marketing and advertising. Brands that behave like their consumers, that understand to the nth detail that behavior, that's who wins. And that's very hard to execute on a platform. And so now we're in this position where we see these platforms kind of unraveling. And I do think, to Amer's credit, they saw this coming. Maybe because people like me were leaving, maybe because people like Diard brought in big fluffy shoes and said, this could be cool. And people said, that does not fit the model.
Right.
But when you have somebody like Diard who says, well, hang on a minute, we own TaylorMade as well, golf. This is a little bit like the story that Gary Taylor told when he showed up at the golf course with his big-headed golf club, and everybody said, that's a dumb idea. And the platform doesn't work for accepting dumb ideas. It's hard to get a dumb idea through a platform. And the only common thing about sports, actually, is sometimes and quite often a dumb idea hits big and becomes the future. Big cushy shoe, dumb idea. A big golf club, dumb idea. Tennis game that you play on a smaller court with a different racket that's named after a pickle, dumb idea.
Yeah.
Neville Brody used to say to me, hey, Brad, the margin becomes the mass. Okay, Neville Brody in my book is another legitimate genius. The margin will always become the mass. And then you think about, well, punk rock was the margin, then bang, Nirvana and grunge, that became the mass. So a lot of what I ask myself with right now is what's on the margins? This is actually the number one question in my life right now. What is on the margins that could become the mass? And could I participate in that in some way that would be fun and interesting with other people?
And then ride that wave.
Ride the wave, have fun, make some cool, energy in the universe. But I always am asking myself, what's on the margins right now that could become the mass? Podcasting was a side project started by an MTV VJ, way on the margins. Now it's the mass. For me, someone my age, podcasts are my number one source of information right now.
And why do you think that is?
Because I'm too old for TikTok. No, I'm saying that jokingly. But I always love that stat that there's that hard line in society where, and I don't know the exact age, but from X age up, the term Googling has meaning. It is the number one way people learn information. From X age down, TikTok is the number one search engine. There's a big divide. And then you think, well, hang on a minute. People are receiving the information visually, blended with music and human movement. Isn't that kind of what skateboarding and snowboarding sort of brought to the table, and surfing?
That's a big claim. Keep going.
I don't know. I'm just saying. Bruce Brown's kid lives around the corner from me.
Those that don't know Bruce Brown, a filmer,
surf legendary, the seminal first ever best surf flick ever.
Yep.
Did that movie kick off how to be a surf hippie? I think
I
so.
agree. Absolutely.
You know, motorcycle culture, I think, can make a claim here as well.
On any Sunday.
On
Bruce
any
Brown
Sunday, 1 and 2.
Yeah.
Easy Rider. You know, and you think about those things, and then you think, well, what great classic sports movie was set to music and poetically delivered in that kind of a way? And you have to kind of scratch your head a little bit. There's you know, there's been some that have come along later, of course, but you know, in the early days of it, and that's why I know it sounds insane, but I do believe there is this neurological pathway that happens in surf, skate, snow, moto, BMX. There's this neurological pathway that creates something really interesting. A guy like Mark Gonzalez could not and does not exist in traditional sports, and they never have. Why is that? Why is that?
Well, again, you had that one baseball player that lived in his van, but that's as close as baseball gets to having a Mark Gonzalez, I think.
A little quirky.
Yeah, quirky, but not
Yeah, a little neurodivergent, but not
that it leveled.
Mark Gonzalez, who's creating a universe out of his products and coming to Adidas and charging them millions of dollars to ride a skateboard through an empty warehouse and call it art.
And making
That's
some tire
awesome.
tracks. Yeah,
That's
good for
awesome.
him. Ay, ay, ay. Well, where can people find you, Brad?
Wow. I'm always available. Actually, like I say, I'm always looking for the margin to become the middle. So that requires me to talk to people
All the time.
on the margins all the time. And I do like hearing crazy ideas. And then, like I said, jury's still out if that's a good way to live your life or not. But it's interesting as hell. And I run across a lot of, I've had days where I'll begin a conversation with a member of the Hermès family in France. I'll then continue to talk to restaurant guys in Ojai. Then we'll have the composer who did the soundtrack to the movie Chicken Run as our guest at the Outpost. Then somebody will bump into Pink at the fire pit at the Outpost. And then at the end of the day, I will talk to Norman Chang, who runs a helmet factory in China and Portugal. And we will talk about his daughter's anime career and what's going on with helmet production globally, and Norman will be in China. And then I'll finish the day with the guys from Indonesia sending me photos of some insane dinner they're having. And I think that's a crazy day. And then, don't forget, like, getting up, breakfast, daughter to school, talking to teachers, learning why, grades are going whatever direction they're going and how people are doing it. And I kind of like that, I kind of like knowing everything and nothing at the same time, but as I grow older, that truthfully, that becomes trickier to manage.
But I wonder too if we had enough, we could do this interview again in 40 years.
Yeah.
And again, it's that creativity or that wanting to engage that will actually increase the quality of your life.
Yeah.
As you have to go down these chapters, This 25 years down in California will be up in 10 years, and then there'll be a new one, right? And so I think it will, actually. I think it's going to give more, your brain's going to feel like it's got a lot more to do and a lot more to give, and it'll keep you healthy for a lot longer. So keep going, my friend, keep going.
I hope so, yeah.
So
that's
your
the big idea.
Your wife, who's a lot younger than you, hopes that too. A lot smarter than you too. No, just kidding. She's great. She was here today.
Yeah, and it's like I said at Solomon, I said when I first came there, I said, well, I have a really simple rule for working that's kind of my number one rule that keeps me on track every day, and I kind of live by that mantra. And they're like, well, wow, what is this mantra? I said, it's don't fuck up. That's my that's what I try to do every day. And then actually later, one of your artists put that in the back of our catalog, and Solomon hit the roof. They were like, you can't put that in the back of a catalog.
We did.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Steve from Nemo did it.
Yeah.
It wasn't me.
It's his fault.
I might have relayed something to him.
I remember that, actually.
It was hilarious. It was a huge hit internally.
I just remember too, like thinking, just having my stereotype of what I thought Solomon and what was going on over there as opposed to what we got away with. But that's always fun.
Yeah.
It's always fun. Cool. All right, buddy.
Think we got it?
There's something there to fight on for sure.